The church is a place where families are celebrated, but what happens when a family has special needs? Does the church do enough to support families with disabilities? Let's talk about the elephant in the room: families with disabilities.
Welcome to another episode of the Big E, the Elephant in the Room. My name is Melissa. Today we will be talking about family with loved ones with disabilities. We have some wonderful women that decided to just be part of this conversation and talk really impactful on how we can truly be an advocate and a support system for families with loved ones with disabilities. So we have Kara Schneider, we have Gia Evans, and Akila Heggs. So we thank you ladies so much for being part of this wonderful conversation. And we just want to dive in because this is such a critical topic and issue, especially during the pandemic. We saw such a need of really try to provide more of a broader support system for families with loved ones with disabilities. So I just want to dive right into here. And whenever your ladies, y'all can jump in, who would ever like to go first. What support systems does the church have in place for families with loved ones with disabilities now? Do you really see any true support system for them now?
So I'll go first. At our church, we actually do, particularly in our kids ministry, one of our staff members, while she was a volunteer, saw a need because there was a number of kids with special needs from autism, ADHD, and disabilities is such a broad term, but in those terms, with kids with maybe learning disabilities or things like that, ADHD that was maybe a little bit less controlled, that couldn't be in those classroom settings, during church. And she started kind of like a separate care group for those kids so that they got more one-on-one attention versus being in a group of 8 to 12 maybe. And so we still have that as a resource. They still get the curriculum in the kids ministry. Parents are still able to sit in while their kids are being cared for, no matter what their need is. And so I think having churches be more open to allotting that, there are people who want to volunteer, who have the gifts and talents to help and care for those children, and opening that door allows for God's kind of path to be allowed right there. And so I think seeking that ability to find people who want to do that and have the passion for it, because without that it would kind of be not as helpful, but they still get the curriculum and parents don't have to worry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I just want to also just find out with that, and I'm going to go into Gia. I want to just dive into you. Are actually a parent of a child with a disability. What have you seen over the years in the support system in churches currently now? And what have you experienced prior to that support?
Yes, it's I've seen it grown. At the very beginning, my child is 18, so in the early 2000s, trying to go to church was a struggle because at the time, and he's diagnosed with autism. It was not very common, should I say. So it was very hard to find a place, especially a church. So I did a lot of church shopping, as I call it, to try to find, someone or a place that could, help us in that journey. However, it's so few and far in between. A lot of churches, didn't and still don't have the resources to help parents with special needs kids and be able to worship. I was able to find a local church, somewhat to what Kara was saying, that was able to help. They have an entire ministry. The children have buddies they're assigned a buddy. So they're able to go to their classroom with their appropriate age group, but they'll have a buddy that will help, navigate them through that process. And then that way they're not having a different person every week. It really worked out well, but like I said, it was really a struggle finding the church that, could accommodate your needs. And then just like I said, just the church shopping itself.
Okay, so Keela Higgs, I just want to really dive into this, because what Gia just said is just profound, to just know what she has gone through over the years. And even though her child is now 18, you are truly a true advocate in your area, in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And if I just want to also go into, if you can tell the audience really a little bit about your background and what have you seen over the years?
Yes, thank you for having me. So I'm actually an audiologist by clinical training, but I have also really worked more broadly with disability in my graduate work, and worked at a Center for Leadership in Disability. So a lot of what I do every day is sort of committed to supporting individuals with disabilities and their families, and really promoting inclusion across all aspects of life. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things about the church is that there hasn't been an intentionality about, first of all, just acknowledging and promoting disability as a normal part of the lived experience. Mm-hmm. So, at any point, any of us could become disabled. And then some of us are born that way, as God has created. And so I think that the church hasn't always really embraced that and understood their position in terms of ministry, and making it accessible to all people who walk through the doors or even in the community. And so I think there is a gap in terms of the church really being responsive to the needs of those who do live with a disability and their families, and to have the resources available to minister to those individuals on their level. I think the church is full of people who do this every day, in their professions. And that, like you said, have the passion, have the training, have the knowledge. But there has to be an intentional focus to do that, to bring all of those individuals together, to develop a ministry, a holistic ministry that's not just about sort of something separate, because that's sort of my soapbox. So it's not about pulling out and being over here. And some people do need that, but it's really about how to make it inclusive. How to keep the children in the same room with the other children that do all of the, the other pieces of ministry, not just at church on a Sunday or a Saturday, but throughout the week when there are all types of activities at the church. So always be thinking about how do we make everything that we do in terms of ministry accessible for everyone, whether that regardless of the type of disability. It could be a developmental disability or neurodevelopmental disability like autism spectrum disorder. It could be a vision loss. It could be a hearing loss. I think sometimes churches just think about hearing loss and a lot of times have interpreters and things like that, but don't think about some of those things that aren't as visible, like behavior disorders, like a ADHD and those types of things. So that's kind of been my experience. And really, the work that I do is really about making, communities, including places of worship, inclusive and accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you for your insight about that, because I think that it's a huge gap in the church, and that's one thing I've noticed. You have the individuals that are doing sign language in the at the front of the church, but I have a concern of, like you said, the children that are autistic, Down syndrome, or just whatever other disability they may have. There's not a support system. And then you have those members in the church that are looking at these parents like, oh, why is your child making all this noise and what's going on? So if one of you want to just kind of answer this, what would you provide to the church and just members as a whole what are some of the signs or support they can do throughout church worship service when they see a family or a loved one in need with a child with a disability?
I'm happy to go again. I think, really normalizing, again, disability. So, and the fact that a child with a disability may make a noise, so does one that doesn't have a disability. I mean, if anybody has a child at any point, they've cried during church or screamed or, acted out. And so I think, again, just normalizing it, but that has to come from the leadership of the church. That has to be sort of the priority in terms of setting the environment that, it's okay. And those things don't disturb the move of God or anything like that. And that, again, just making sure that people understand that this is just a natural part of the lived experience. If there are designated people who can assist, because a lot of times people just don't feel comfortable, asking for help because they don't know it, sort of the culture of the church. And so I think it just has to be promoted and embraced in a way that makes everyone feel, again, included, that this is, it's normalcy. It's not something different.
And I would agree with Akilah. You said something, I think as a parent, what I would have liked to seen, as you know, when I mentioned the church shopping, not seeing the look of judgment and the look of, you can't control your child, because at a younger age, he was very hyper. So he didn't really, know how to sit and, through a sermon. So I think for me, it would have been just for someone to say, do you need help with anything? Is there anything that I can help you with? I think that would have been, enough support for me. And you're right, I think it comes from a leadership. It trickles down from the church, from the leader, and then helping the congregation understand the different types of, different abilities and things like that. And I think I shared with Melissa in speaking one time, we were talking about church shopping and the experience of going to a church. Not my experience, but one of a friend going to a church during worship. Son was he's very hyper, so he likes to jump during worship. And, the ushers asking them, either to go to the back of the church or leave because, it was making others uncomfortable. So I think if, just that leadership coming from the top, going down and just I think it's really just starting with knowledge. If more people understood, what it is, and then just, offering to help, even if it's, do you need me to, give them something, or just, what is it that I can do to help you?
It's really funny because I was going to say kind of both of those things, Gia, to piggyback on Akilah, is that I think first and foremost, education. And I would love to see our church leaders look to their congregation for the experts, for the parents who have had to become doctors without the MD. For, like myself, I'm a counselor. I would love to come down to the office one day and just share what I know. I don't have a problem with that. If it's going to help people see God and be able to fall in love with Jesus like I have, of course, I'm willing to share that. That's why I'm here. And so I think that first and foremost, we need to have leaders buying into the education that this is kind of a normalcy. It is a normalcy. And I was thinking one of the things that kind of came to my mind, Akilah, when you were talking was, we're called by the Bible for anyone to come as you are. And so God made, people with all kinds of abilities or non-abilities and disadvantages, and we should recognize that as church leaders. And then it trickles down. If a staff knows what to expect, and maybe to just have a caring and empathetic heart, because I think that's the biggest help that a parent, Gia, that's what I heard from you is, just for someone to say, how can I help you? It's okay,
Mhm.
that's a huge piece. And so then to have your volunteers, your ushers be in trainings
Yeah.
that have similar
Yeah.
information. And then because then the second piece of it is role modeling. So if you're seeing volunteers and church staff normally just saying, how can I help you? Well,
Mhm.
then we should all be like that regardless of ability or non-ability.
Yeah.
And so as Jesus lovers. And
Yes.
so, it's really just doing what we're called to do as humans,
Mhm.
with a little extra information about what maybe particular needs might be.
Mhm.
And then I also thought about this because I'm a mental health counselor. So we work with vocational rehabilitation all the time for all kinds of disabilities.
Mhm.
And so I think about this in a way of it's finding accommodations for people so that they can participate just as you and I would without some of those disabilities or difficulties.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think, again, that just falls back to training, education, and normalizing.
We're going to have to take a quick commercial break, and we will be right back.
We know that God has called you to a mission, but sometimes you need a little help getting there. At the Center for Clergy and Church Support, we strive to encourage, empower, and equip ministries and nonprofit organizations to do all that God has called them to do. We handle basic legal issues, conduct administrative and financial audits, and strengthen organizations in community engagement and capacity building. Let us help your ministry or nonprofit in advancing the kingdom of God. Visit clergycenter.org for more information.
Thank you again for watching The Big E, the elephant in the room. And today we have a wonderful topic talking about families with loved ones with disabilities. Now, Carrie, you had just said not too long ago, you're a counselor with counselor dealing with just multiple facets of individual with disabilities. Do you actually think that churches would be open to having outside resources to come in?
If anything, the last year, well, I guess it's been 2 years
Yes.
of pandemic life and quarantining has shown us is that we need to be creative. And that I think at this point, if a church is not open-minded to it, they're really doing a disservice to their church and evangelism, and bringing new people. What better way to have more of a bigger congregation if you're being creative in all facets, not just different music and different maybe guest speakers, but what about having just accommodations or better inclusion opportunities and education? I think that at this point, the world needs us as Christians,
Yes.
because it's a scary world out there right now for
Yes.
so many reasons, violence and COVID and all of these things. And so I think it's our duty, to do whatever we can. And if that means kind of swallowing some pride and saying maybe we don't know everything about how to run a church, I think that there's no shame in that. Things change all the time. Research changes, even in religious studies and theology. And so I think that we are called to do this, to be more educated and knowledgeable about all kinds of topics. I think that it's a disservice, even, dare I say, to ignore COVID. I think we've seen that it's real. And so educating ourselves about not just hot button topics that are theological, but also what is plaguing each and every congregation member. How many of us have never had a depressive episode, or how many of us have never had anxiety? The numbers have to be small. And so I think it is only our duty to become more knowledgeable and trained.
Yes. Any insight from you, Gia or Kayla, on what she just stated?
No, I think I would add, and we kind of touched on this earlier. Kara was talking about just the different things that the churches can do. But I think one of the things as well is the church should be able to, or take the time to identify abilities or disabilities, excuse me, that are not seen. Like we were saying, you would have an interpreter there because you know that you have a deaf community, or that there's some blind people, or so you would go, above and beyond to make sure you accommodate. But then, as Akila was saying earlier, what about those disabilities that are not seen, that you can't really look at a person and see that there's a type of disability? I think that the church needs to take the opportunity to sit down and, help identify and focus on ways to help the community with those as well.
Mm-hmm. Any feedback on you, Raquel?
Yeah, I would just add that I think there are already, infrastructure in place in most churches. Like there's probably a health ministry or something like that. I mean, the three of us or the four of us are probably all connected to a ministry where we could be a resource. I think it's just about how do you, start that dialogue? How do you identify others in, the church that also have the same interests and concerns, and really start to bring people together? I think, and I talk sort of about this all the time too. I don't know if we always tap into the resources that are there within the church. Like sometimes it's just going to the same people, and it could be that very person that's sitting there waiting to say, hey, this is my thing, and I could really, make an impact here. So again, it's hard to kind of know where to start with that within the church. I know I have tried a couple of times myself to say this is something that we need to try to address, whether that's approaching the pastor or a minister, to get to the pastor to really just kind of talk through these things. But I think that that the church itself, individual churches probably have resources even within them. Those that don't, certainly, there would be an opportunity to reach out to them and be a resource. But really identifying, like, how do we identify what the needs are of the congregation? And again, I think that takes a whole lot of intentionality. I think some of that has bubbled up during COVID to say, what do people need? People are, hurting and experiencing things in a different way that maybe not have been, as obvious prior to COVID. And so it's going to take, people asking questions about what the needs of their congregation are, which hopefully will include, support for individuals with disabilities and their families, and how to be more accommodating and be more accessible in all aspects of the ministry.
So, y'all are talking about this, and I just realized, with the pandemic, we were on that lockdown for quite some time. And I think that's when the church should have jumped in and reached out to the members, reached out to loved ones. And this is not just for loved ones with disabilities, they should have reached out and said, hey, that's when they should have did the survey. What can we do now to be the resource? What can we do now to make sure everyone is okay? And that's how they build their surveys, to know when the churches open up, because now they just want to get back to their norm. Yeah. And you're just going back into that normal routine. But when we were in that point of crime, I personally feel, God locked us down for a reason. And that was our time to sit still and see where those gaps are and fill in those gaps. But some of us took the opportunity to see it and utilize it, and some didn't. So I think if the church takes more time to realize, because not everyone is still comfortable going back into the church. A lot of people are still hesitant. So those that are not going in and still feel uncomfortable, still do those surveys. Figure out where those gaps are. Maybe they're not going because they saw there was a void when the church was fully open. Like Gia said, maybe, she wasn't going to church because she didn't feel that she was getting the proper services. Well, why isn't Gia going? Well, did you ask her?
Right.
And you're right, and that's what it takes. I think, in speaking with some other individuals, one church just would ask their, first-time guests, reach out to them and, ask them, have you been back? And if you haven't, then tell us why. And it was, the need of, because, I have a special needs child that and I'm not able to focus. And that's how a ministry, was put together. In our local church, it was a ministry of college students who were special education majors. So they were the ones who just kind of, okay, there's a need. We have the resources, like Akila said, we have these, college students here, and they're studying about it. Of course, we're going to have, somebody to help them out. That has, maybe the experience, but, they're the ones that can, that's going to prepare them for their career. So it's just a matter of reaching out and say, how is it that we can help you? And, like I said earlier, and the people will tell you what they need the help with if you just ask.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's tapping into people. I'm sorry. I think it's tapping into people's, hidden talents in some ways, right? That maybe because you haven't had that conversation with a person, because they've just been coming, they're dedicated, not to know what maybe their specialties are or what their interests are. I know we have a friend who, while she works at an eye doctor's office, has a huge passion for working with children with Down syndrome. If you didn't have a conversation with her, you would never know that to tap into. Well, why don't you, would you be interested in helping us with a ministry of being there and educating us and those kinds of things? And I think that that's, just a huge thing that we need to do too, is really getting to know each other in a congregation. I think we go there and we're like, oh, this is my time with God, which is true.
Yeah.
But we're also supposed to be in community. We're not supposed to be in lonely places either. And so I think that just creates a bigger community in all kinds of ways.
Akila, you were going to.
I was just going to respond back to one of the things you said about, sort of transitioning back to in-person church and some of the considerations where, I know we're kind of talking more about, kind of neurodevelopmental disabilities, but I'm just thinking broadly about anybody with a special healthcare need. There are serious concerns and, risks involved in those individuals coming back to in person. And again, it's another opportunity for the church to be responsive to that, to say, there are going to be a group of people who just don't maybe ever feel that comfortable coming back in person because they, have a compromised immune system or, just a health condition that really puts them at risk. And so how do you, again, continue to minister to those who may feel disconnected, even more so as church congregations start to transition back to in-person, but you're just going to have this group that just won't ever fully be able to come back, all the way because of, the challenges related to COVID exposure.
And then not even that, just to counter on that one, a lot of individuals with disabilities, they don't feel comfortable getting this vaccination either. So they don't know, their parents might say, well, I don't feel comfortable in my child getting the vaccination because, they still have concerns, so that's another, that's another avenue that the church has to look at too.
Like Kara said, it all leads back to creativity and being innovative in this time.
Yes, exactly. Well, ladies, I truly thank you so much for this conversation. It's truly been impactful. I hope our viewers really take heed. I hope our church leadership take heed in this conversation and to start really striving to make a difference and be a vessel and a tool to your church community. So we just want to again thank you for watching The Big E, the elephant in the room, where we speak about the unspeakable.